welcome to Adobe Muse Jam Session, recording number 146. My name is Danny Beaumont, and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team. And in today's session, we're going to focus on wireframing workflows. I am in a phone room that's got dead sound because today I'm also going to be recording up a whole bunch of videos to show off the new features that are under development with Muse. So definitely a great, exciting time for the Adobe Muse product. I am joined today by Brian Thomas, who is also a product manager on the Muse team based up in Seattle, and he's going to help me cover chat today. So if you have questions as you go along, Brian will keep an eye out for that. Maybe he'll even keep a clipboard handy and kind of copy paste the questions you want to make sure that he throws at me as we go along, and I will pause from time to time and check in and see how things are going. So with that said, if you have not done so, please answer the questions on the right-hand side. Looks like we've got a couple good Muse masters with us. If you're a master, I expect you to help out with chat. Give Brian a hand. It would be great. And let's go ahead and switch over now that we are there. And I'm going to bring back our chat. Not sure why that happens sometimes. There it is, gone. One more time, or else you guys get to chat all over it. Could be because you aren't chatting about anything. How about that? So you will notice in the upper left-hand corner here, I have some resources. Each week when I do this session, as I bump into content that I think is interesting, I do kind of capture that. And I've got a gathering of those bits. So as with many aspects of Muse, you as a web designer, in my opinion, it is not your responsibility to worry about code. That is the responsibility of the Muse team. If you are looking for consistency across browsers, platforms, devices, and you don't see it, ask the Muse team to work with you in finding issues there. That is our job. As you know, the web is a moving target, so it is an ever-changing world, whereas browsers update. Compatibility varies, but as I mentioned, the engineering team worries about that. What your job to worry about really is focusing on taking advantage of best practices as a designer when you focus on the web. So if you were born in the land of print, I was kind of born in the land of print when I came into desktop publishing a long time ago. I am not a designer, but I've observed designers for a long time. And it's quite possible. I remember doing some dabbling in some design work. The first time I had to figure out what a trifold brochure did, or I had to understand how packaging would fold up into a shape, and how communication of information could be handled in a container that was standard, like a package. How do you expect people to read the content? And you had to learn. I also did a project where you did imposition software, how to reorder pages so that when they are printed out and bound, they're in a proper order for a book. And these are all weird paradigms that as a visual designer, you need to acclimate to. And I believe that the web, if you are new to the web, is its own world in that end. The articles that I show you are talking about the process by which you build out a user experience, a web site, as effectively as possible. And I encourage you to kind of check on some of that. What I'm going to do with you is show you how that wireframing workflow, that prototyping workflow, can be handled within the Muse application. So it looks like we're all good to go. Brian's poking around a little bit, but I think he's good. We're all good, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, so what we have is, I'm going to kind of show you some finished examples first. So if you are not familiar with this idea of wireframing, there's a lot of phrases. I love the phrase standards. I love them. There's so many to choose from. As standards evolve, there seem to be a lot of different ways to communicate that. Let me get out of full screen here. Anybody can figure out how to make the new Yosemite stop doing this to my screen, I will give them a Muse Rockstar mug. That's what it's all about today, giving away Rockstar mugs. If you have used Muse to wireframe in the past and will share your wireframe examples with me, I will probably give you a Muse mug. So We'll talk about that. In fact, let's talk about it now. So if you go to muse.adobe.com, there is a page, if you're not familiar with it. This is a microsite. It's a space where the Muse team shares ideas and designs. This is built predominantly in Muse. There's a page called Site of the Day, and we showcase different designs. If you've got a great design that you've done using Muse, even if you don't think it's something that we would show, but you want to show the team, please submit it to us by clicking on the Submit Your Site. If you have a wireframe site that you've built within Muse, or a wireframe source Muse file that's now live on the web as a finished design, please send that to us using this form. Give me a note in the optional area. And if you really are sending and it's really a reasonable wireframe, I'll send you a Muse Rockstar mug. Because we rarely get to see the wireframes that people build out. I have an example today from one of our Muse designers that we'll share, but to a large extent, this is an internal process that you go through. So let's just talk about, let me talk about this for a second. Yeah, thought I could get lucky here. I'm going to open up good old PowerPoint, which hasn't been open on my machine in a long time. And let's just talk about this idea of wireframing web applications. So when you as a designer are working with your client, there's a process that you're going to go through from discovery, so working with the client, understanding what their intentions are about, all the way out to usability and finishing out the finished design. Now, I thought this was kind of interesting maybe 5 years ago. Maybe it's not such an epiphany now. But to me, what is interesting is with the evolution of the web, when you're working with small business owners, a lot of times that business owner doesn't write a business plan. They don't go to venture capital people to get funding. They come up with a concept that they want to sell, and then they quite often build up a website and try to create awareness for their product. So there's no brick and mortar. There's no huge real capital investment. Sometimes a website is the first time an emerging company, an emerging idea, an emerging product gets to be established on the web. So you as a web designer are really a business consultant to that small business owner. And I personally love to redesign existing websites because that whole back and forth with a client the first time they're trying to build a website is a huge process. Letting them understand how to communicate their information, what the sales funnel might be. Let's assume for a moment that website is selling something. How to make sure that people that come to the website pass through this funnel to actually be driven towards the goal of the website, which is selling a product or raising awareness or communicating details about some organization. And as you work through that process, it's important as that consultant to that business owner that you do understand what are the intentions behind their design. Ideation is where you explore concepts. What's the paradigm you're going to use for your site? When you go to Netflix, old people like me remember when you would buy a DVD off a shelf in a shop. And the Netflix paradigm was often like going to individual shelves for drama or independent films or comedy and being able to find the individual film. There are millions of videos now available with Netflix, and the paradigm is very important for someone like my dad to be able to come in and find a movie that he wants to watch. And building out that process, the ideation and prototyping stages are really important around exploring different ideas. So really the point of this image here is talking about when it's time to kind of go crazy Ivan and explore a great deal of ideas, and then when the cost for change becomes more severe. So the concept here is as you're working with a client, as you're working with colleagues, as you're thinking through the constructs of a site, there's a number of tools you can use. Many people will pull out pencil and paper and actually sketch out concepts. I actually did go in and sketch out some wireframes. I did it on a whiteboard, and I took a picture of them, and then I tied them together in Muse. I linked those drawings together within Muse to create kind of a click-through prototype. But what I found is it was totally not worth the effort in many ways. Sketching on a whiteboard, getting consensus, sketching on a napkin, a piece of paper, is a really good starting point. But what I would suggest is even though you can sketch very quickly, you can wireframe in Muse just as quickly. And it's much more forgiving around changing your mind, changing your ideas as you go along. So the concept here is suggesting that the further you go into your design process, the cost of change becomes greater. So if you're working with a client and you're talking through pages and where all of the content's going to live, and you're deciding, do you have a Contact Us form and an About Us page? If that client gets all the way to a fully visualized design, if you still use Photoshop, let's say, to do a Photoshop comp, or you build out a full site in Muse, having that bit of information, guess what, we need an About Us page, come late in the process, does have greater consequence as you go along. So really looking at how you ideate, how you explore concepts very early on, whether it's a whiteboard or you begin with wireframe drawings within the application, is very important. Now, when you're working with paper, as I mentioned, it's not very forgiving. There comes a time where you may be working with a client, but you're moving your hands around an awful lot, trying to communicate interactivity. And the web today, as it evolves, becomes more and more like a software application. You're not just a designer, you're an interaction designer, you're an interface designer. And prototyping out an experience and testing how usable that experience is really important as you work. So assuming for a moment you may or may not have begun with that sketch frame for where you're working, the next step is to come in and wireframe out a concept. So let's look at a couple pages on the web here. I have this Katie's Cafe bakery website here. And what we did, this is kind of a couple years old at this point, so it's an older version of Katie's Cafe. What I did is built the site out in Adobe Muse, and I specifically did a few things here. Let me close this out for a second. I specifically went in and built out elements trying to elicit information from my client. So there's no right rule around wireframes. I once heard a designer say they wish they had like a slider that they could slide for more or less detail of the design as they showed it to different clients. As you're working with a client, they may say, wow, I hate that typeface, it's terrible. And you say, no, that's the whole point. It's kind of a handwriting typeface. It's not really a typeface yet. I need you to focus on the navigation. Are you seeing all of the content that you expect to be here? And explaining things like how that navigation will exist, how items will layer on top of one another, and really focusing on the persistent navigation. What is the means by which the viewer of this website is going to get their information? So you'll notice here I've got, this page seems kind of small to me here. Let's do that. You'll notice that I've got some very simple containers, very wireframey. I have the ability to roll over objects, and as a viewer of the website, if I roll over something and it changes just one color, very simple green, it's a point or an area that I can navigate the site. Now you'll notice this is a pretty interactive prototype. I can communicate where a gallery might exist and how I might have a tabbed panel that toggles between that gallery and the back-end story. In the gallery, I'll have unique images that can be clicked on and navigated between. On the visit page, I can communicate a map is going to go here, and you're going to be able to show 3 different locations on that map where various details are. And you can see in some ways I kind of break the rules here. There's something known as lorem ipsum, right, or Greeking, right? The idea there is that trying to get your client not to think about the words yet, not to think about the pictures. So if we go back to that About page, I've got just placeholder for graphics. There are no images here yet. Under Story, I've got a little bit of sample text. This could easily be Greeking. It could be nonsensical text if I think my client is going to obsess about what the words say already. And that's up to you to decide about how detailed you do get with the content. Now, the amazing thing about Muse, when you think about the process that you're working in, many people that I talk to that are working with Muse have probably been a designer for 10, 15 years. And I'm incredibly curious to see if kids today, I know there's a bunch of Dutchies on this meeting, and you probably are some of the instructors, or from what I understand, I'm going to pause for a second. I lived in Amsterdam for 3 years, and even with Brian on the call here, I'm going to poke at him because I swear there's something in the water in Holland that is making Muse blossom like tulips, I'll just go ahead and say, in that there are I've met at least half a dozen instructors in the Netherlands region, and there are 400 or 500 students that are there that are using the tool. But I digress for a moment. What was my point, other than wanting to go to Amsterdam? Well, gee, I think I've lost track of it. But as I work, being able to come in and reuse the tools, I know I found my thread, which is if you are an instructor, you can tell me if the world is changing or not. If you're teaching university students, let's say designers, my hypothesis is that as Muse tools become more visual designers, as they work on concepts for websites, they're not going to use Illustrator and Photoshop to flesh out a design. And the paradigm there really is one of layout. So I remember back when Illustrator was first born. I remember when Photoshop was first born, and then when InDesign came to be. And when I first started to use InDesign, let's say I was working on a logo with text. If in Photoshop I flattened out the text with my image and placed it into InDesign, I would either get a really big file with really high resolution text that had been flattened, or I'd have fuzzy text that didn't scale or work very well. What you learned over time is Illustrator is fantastic for vector content, Photoshop's fantastic for image content, and InDesign is the ideal tool for laying out designs. Now, you may have designed a book or a magazine in Photoshop once or twice, but then you probably evolved to say, you know what, maybe I'll design one page in Photoshop to get the feel for the magazine layout, but then I'm going to really start in InDesign with my page, with my structure, and build it out and bring in Illustrator and Photoshop content. Now that Muse supports SVG or scalable vector content, it becomes very realistic to use Muse to place images and place vector content and scale it in relationship to one another as you build out the site. So my question is, does the world change? Do designers today still start in Photoshop as they build out a design, or do they start in Muse? And I would propose Muse is so much better of a tool. I'm going to close this Microsoft product out because I don't want it open anymore. Here I am in Adobe Muse. And let's say I'm starting from scratch on a concept. Pull that on File to New, and I'm going to build out a basic site. And you'll notice I'm placed into one of 4 workspace layouts, the plan mode here. This is my first form of wireframing, prototyping, iteration. I want to think about the site that I'm working with and how I'm going to build out those pages. I want to come in and have a home page. Let's just call it landing. I can come in and add an about page. I can add products, contact. Under products, I might have, who knows what I have here, fruit and vegetables. Very quickly, I'm starting to look at the construct of my site. I'm going to obviously have child pages, fruit and veggies, and they're going to be child pages of my products. I'm selling fruits and vegetables, it seems. How do we discover that? How are they organized in relationship to one another? It's so much easier to think through my pages here in this layout. As I progress, I then want to think about what is my navigation? What's the persistence across my site? And if I come into a master page, the nice part about masters is they can have master inheritance, so they can inherit from one another elements, which means that as you structure your site, let's say I've got footer navigation across everything on my site here that's going to be common, but I want to have a different header than I do a footer. If I come into Muse, I can come in and start to begin to think through all of those elements. I can decide my site construct here. So do I have a header area, a footer area? Let me kind of pause and actually go into probably a confusing little category, but I think there's value in explaining it. I'm trying to think how I'll explain it best. We'll probably go to the more finished wireframe, but there's when you come to a master page, it kind of feels like a page in InDesign, a piece of paper on a design space. But it's actually depicting the web, which makes it a little different than Microsoft Word or InDesign. There's the idea of the top of the browser. And that top of the browser occurs here, and then I have top of the page just below that. So it's possible to have browser area occur above the page. I'm going to go ahead and drag that up so that they're one and the same for a moment. The next area I have is this idea of a header, and then down below I have the idea of a footer, and then there's the bottom of the page, and then browser area that might stand out below the bottom of that page. If I come in and give my page a fill color, you can see that I now have the page reaching the top to the bottom of the site. Now, in 1984, I think, when the web first came out and you went to IBM.com, there was an idea of kind of a page. It looked like a piece of paper floating in space. And over time, the web evolved to have a background browser area. Well, more and more modern websites don't really have the idea of a page with a browser area behind it. It's more of an immersive experience. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now that we've kind of taken a quick look at it. But one of the things that's interesting from a wireframing standpoint is when I build out masters, by setting the point here where my page content begins, I can have a consistent amount of page content with different browser headers, different navigation. As I mentioned, I'm going to try to show this to you in action a little bit in the wireframe example. But at this point, I'm going to want to think through the bare bones of my site. What are my wireframe elements that I'd like to work with, and just start with them. So I'm going to close this guy out a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and swing into the most basic widget that probably everybody starts with a little bit, which is a horizontal menu. And I'm going to press and drag it into location. And what you'll notice is by default, it's leveraging my site plan. So if, as I work with my client, with my colleague, with my own mind, if I change my mind and decide, if I go back to site plan here, that you know what, the about page should be just to the left of the contact page. If I then go back to that page, going to the right location here, if I go back to my master, about is now just to the left of contact. So making changes in the site plan, that dynamic menu, it's going to be respected. Now as I work, I want to get to that wireframe state, and it was actually kind of funny. I think Terry White, many of you know, he's one of our evangelists, and he was presenting at Max, and he talked about our widgets, and he said, the Muse team is so nice. They do a lot of things to make your life easier. One thing they do when it comes to widgets is they make them so bad looking you have to redesign them. And he's right. They are in their most basic form not incredibly attractive. But that's where this wireframing palette is going to really start to be to your advantage. If I were working on the Katie's Cafe website and I wanted to get started quickly, what I can do, and what I've already done here, is I've gone into my wireframed instance where I built out a number of elements. So I have, for example, just silly little containers here. It's a plain up little container. If I go to, let's say, the, let's just see, if I jump to my About page, you'll notice I have a tabbed panel here. And I've got funny little tabs to echo the funny little design. And placed inside this widget, this tabbed panel, so I can drag it away. Notice when I drag it here in the upper left-hand corner, if I escape up, I see that I'm in a tabbed panel. And then if I click a second time inside the tabbed panel, I have a content area. Click a third time, nested inside of that is a slideshow composition widget with trigger targets to show that off. So they're just basically a series of widgets that are nested inside of themselves that I can work with. Now, they're styled in a way to be not styled. Again, I used to work on other prototyping products, and when I went to visit customers, we would ask them what they want in terms of wireframe design. And one of the things I learned is everything you present to your client is your brand. So actually putting effort into the look and feel of your wireframe library. A, you'll be able to reuse it from project to project, but B, when you present it to your client, if it's got its own identity, it defines you. It is the look of your company, of your service, and you can kind of put your stamp of ownership on it. So taking time to build out these components, if we go back to that master page with the navigation that's here, it's totally unstyled. What I can do is come into each element and change the fonts and the colors. And the line weight. I've done that in my wireframe example, and let me just show you how some of the magic of Muse works. Notice I've got landing, products, about, and contact. I'm going to come on in here and do something a little bit, let's just change this to produce. So produce, since we have fruits and vegetables, of course. And my navigation updates to say produce there. What I'm going to do is jump over to that wireframed example, and let's go on into that master page. And in the master page, I've got a navigation element, right? So it is the same master, it's the same menu that I grabbed just a moment ago, but I've gone in and I've changed the fonts, I've changed the colors. You'll notice if I click into food here, I've got that rollover down in active state, very simple, defined for the element. If I come in and copy this, so I'm going to select it and say edit copy, although I always keyboard that, so let's do this. I'm going to escape up so that I've selected the entire widget. I'm going to come in and copy it, and then let's go into that new master. I'm going to say edit paste. Now, interestingly enough, it's now adjusting to the active content of this site. So it doesn't say landing, it doesn't say whatever it said on Katie's. It no longer says food, events, home, about, and visit. It's exactly saying what is in my site plan, landing, produce, about, and contact. So what happened there is the style that I applied to the widget is retained, but the dynamic nature of that widget changes. Okay? Another interesting thing happened also is if I come in and look at my swatches and I delete all unused swatches, that's not that interesting. I don't like that. And I'll explain it in a moment. If I come into paragraph styles, I have some styles here. Now, before I added this menu here, body medium and bottom small was not there. In fact, let's do a little undoing. I'm going to fix my world here. So I'm going to take that away, undo. Notice there are no paragraph styles here. And if I clear out my swatches, there's no swatches. There's nothing retained here. I'm going to go back to my first example. This is also an opportunity for me to fix something I need to fix. I'm going to revert this because I stole the navigation away. All right, and I'm going to come on into this element here. Now I've got the navigation that's just here. I'm going to press and drag it down. And if I click in on an object and I select events, type T on the keyboard, if it wants to cooperate with me. Okay, notice that this is using a font called Danny's Script. It's actually not. It's kind of a little confused here. I don't think that's accurate. We come in and select this just a little bit more. So Architect's Daughter, that's actually what's applied here. I originally used my own handwriting script, but I changed it. I'm going to make sure it knows that it's using that font. So I've got a font that's being used here, and if I click on it and go to my paragraph styles, what you'll notice is I can come in and create a paragraph style for each element here. I already have defined some styles. Let's go in and see if I can match what I've got there. Okay, that's pretty good. So now when I click on this object, it's using a paragraph style. Now this paragraph style, I went in and changed basically the typeface, the size of that typeface, any spacing or leading attributes that I wanted to have. I also went into the spacing panel and can create some space around elements that you'll notice here. Anything that I applied to this typographic element, I could then come in and in the paragraph styles area, save it out as a style by clicking on this little add button here. If I double click on this object, you can see all of the attributes that are assigned to this typographic element. Now, when I come in and do that and give it a name, that becomes a style that carries forward with my design from project to project. So I've got body medium set here. If we go and look at graphic styles and I click in on this object, what I want to do is make sure I get to that rollover state. Notice I have a color applied here. In the fill area, there is that color. It's right there. Notice that it's an RGB value. When I want to make colors behave more like styles, I do that by giving them an absolute name, not a color value. It sort of genericizes it or makes it into a style. So what I can do with this green is come on into that and right mouse and select swatch options. And notice that by default it's got named with color value. You could come in here and just call this wire highlight and click OK. All right, I now have an element. I've got this menu that has fonts, colors, spacing. I could come in and apply graphic styles, which I've done from a color standpoint, but I could add things like a shadow. Notice I've got head tab shadow. This has a lovely little shadow applied to it to give it that illusion of depth in the wireframe space, and I've saved that out as a graphic style. I'm going to come on in just to raise this up just a little bit more, and I want to select all of these elements, and I'm just going to copy them. Copy, and I'm going to go back to my emerging wireframe example. Let's see here, and I'm going to paste them down. So what I get is my new menu. I've got navigation here behind it. Let's go ahead and pull that navigation out because it's a different number of pages. And when I brought that in, notice that the shadow graphic style came over. If I come into my swatches panel now, I get the green. Obviously, I'm mistakenly using two greens in this design, but there's the named green there, wire highlight, that's carrying over. And also in my paragraph styles, I get body medium, the topic, the color that's there. All right, we just dove pretty deep into a concept, but the point of what I'm showing you is if you organize your design very early on, and as you build out your wireframe, if you assign styles, be it graphic styles, paragraph styles, or swatch styles, you can easily go in and make changes in a global manner as you continue to work. So here I am with this navigation, and I've got my page started just a little bit. I can come in, as I showed you, with my menu and make lots of changes. I can change words and start to work with the elements, and those styles will continue to be associated with each individual element. So let me jump out here and do a little bit of before and after magic. And let's look at this wireframe site that's built out. So I've got a master page here. And I do want to mention that there are a number of links in the resources panels to the source assets for this file. There's an article that actually talks about the wireframing process using an older design, Kevin's Coffee Cart, of quite a few years ago. But you're welcome to download these assets and use them as widgets that you'll work with. And that's pretty much what you'll want to do once you've built out your first wireframe design. So I have a design here that I've set up. Let's go ahead and close the finished instance for now. It's confusing my tiny self. And I built out certain elements. So I came in and defined a background fill. It's kind of a putty color. I added elements, some more graphical than others. This could easily be SVG, given the support we have now for SVG. Right now it's an image because it's got some angles here that I can't draw with just containers. And I have widgets as I'm working. On individual pages, remember how we talked about having different headers and footers and such? I have a footer here that is my main master, and then I could experiment with two different types of navigation. One where the navigation is pinned up at the top of the page, and another where the navigation actually stays in the background and moves out of the way. Both of these masters here are inheriting the root footer, so I can design this footer once and have it be inherited. And then I went through, once I had my colors and my fonts defined, and started to apply it to different elements. So I wanted to simulate a blog post here, an embed code. And I'm just using that standard text. Notice I've got body medium, I've got body small, I have some variations there as well. I've got my navigation elements, but I'm building them out and I'm styling them very specifically in a very simple, straight up way. Now what you get for free when you use Muse to build out a wireframe level is that click-through interactivity experience. Let's go back to that design just for a minute in the web. So remember how I had the ability to hover over and see all of the click areas, understand where the navigation is going to work. Notice that in the About area, actually under Visit here, I've got a map. Well, I chose to use a tooltip, a trigger target, or a composition widget to allow you to roll over and give a hint, basically. This is a non-interactive map. It's just a screenshot to give them a sense of where the map would occur. But I have little tips here, and depending on who you're working with, depending on whether or not you'll be with your client, when you build out that wireframe, you're welcome to add little tooltips that indicate to them options that are available to them, details that you would like to share with them, the voiceover, in essence, that you'd like to have as they click through the experience and can figure out what you're testing them, what you're asking them to come up with greater detail about. So the idea at this point is that I've got a nice wireframe site, and it's very light and it's very easy to change. As I'm working, I can indicate areas that are content to be downloaded, PDF file attachments, you name it. You can really build out all of the functionality of your site using this wireframe mode. So as you work with the clients, they'll come in and say, wow, I didn't think the events page was going to be so short. Can we have more? And you're like, sure, we'll go ahead and add page 1, page 2 to indicate the navigation, the paging that would happen on that page. And in the visit area, having all of the addresses down at the bottom is taking up the majority of the space. So being able to add other elements, it's just very, very easy for you to iterate, to put this in front of someone that is interested, well, basically some usability testing. So if you want to make sure that things are communicated well in Katie's Bakery Cafe here, you could put it in front of an average person and say, show me where you would go to catering. How would you order from the menu? Can you find the menu? What's the experience? And standing over their shoulder to see how they interact with these elements is very powerful. So if I were doing this in a Photoshop way, I might throw a page or a two. I might do drawings in Illustrator, but it's a very throwaway effort. And the exciting part with Muse is that once you've come in and built out all of these elements, when you've gone in and defined styles, you can easily go in and make changes to that across the site. So let's say I've worked with my client and I've pushed up a wireframe instance and we've iterated 2, 3, 4 times and I have a number of different versions available. Finally, the client and I sign off on that content. The next thing that I want to do is actually take it and mature it to a finished design. So I want to show you kind of 2 elements of how you can use Muse really powerfully there. The first one is if you've taken the time to build out all of your styles for colors and fonts, you may come in and say, you know what, that green was great, but it has nothing to do with Katie's Cafe. I want to come in and find all instances of that green. And again, I've got a strange multiple instance here, so I probably won't do all instances. But let's go to a page that's got a good deal of color. If I came in and changed that color to any other color, really lovely shade of blue, and click OK, depending on whether or not I grab the right one, let's try this one, swatch options. Go in here. Let's just see what green we got going on here. So you are filled with just a strange old color. This is an example of why you want to create styles, because when you don't, what you have to do is go manually change this every single time. Had it had a named color, or maybe I need to select the right spot here. Demo guides at work. Yeah. Let's go pick on somebody else. We know that the navigation got broke. Danny. Let's come on in to this guy. And I'm going to get there, I promise. All right, so notice how it somewhat worked for me here. I've gone in and changed the named color there to be that shade of blue. And by just changing that value associated with it, I can preview the page and pretty much good. Most all instances here have changed to that new shade of blue. So I can come in once I've defined the style and change the value associated with that style. If typographically I'm ready to use a real typeface, let's say I want to come in and go with Merriweather Bold, I can come in and change the instance of that font if it's associated with a style, which styles are arguing with me this morning. Let's see, body medium. If I come on in and look at the definition of body medium there and change that to Merriweather, lovely font, and basically select my style here and say redefine style based on the current selection, if I jump back out on the site, notice that all instances of that design now are using that different typeface change of that style. So I can come in and make changes and it's going to propagate the whole design. Now once you get this set, it's important to make them reusable. And that's also a magic feature that Muse has that's lovely, which is you can come in and grab the elements as you're working. So if I have a perfect design, let's go back to perfect because it's looking messy to me. I'm going to reopen this guy one more time. And once I've got the design finished, let's say I'm working with Katie, or I've just gone in and created a really generic look and feel for all of my wireframes, I can come in now and save these out as elements. So I've got a tabbed panel. I can save that out. What I would do is come into the overall element, my tabbed panel here, select it. So there's my tabbed panel. And if I just go ahead and right mouse, I can say add to a library. And you'll notice I've created a library called Katie's Wire. I can associate it with that library. It's going to add it into the area. And I've already got a tab panel, but we'll call it tab again. And hit enter. Once I've done that, notice if you zoom in here a little too much, notice I've got blogs, elements, I've got a download icon, I've got all the icons that I'm using in the design, a lightbox example. These are all widgets that have been styled with colors and fonts and graphic effects that are associated with that widget now. I can save them all out in a library. And if I work on a team, let's say 6 of us work for Katie's Cafe, and we're all responsible for iterating. A real good example is a real estate agency. They have to do a flyer every time there's an open house. Giving a team the ability to build out a web page that updates that particular listing using a standard identity is really powerful when you use these libraries. So I could come to the Katie's Wire set and just export it. And in exporting it, I give it some name. So I've got katieswire.mulib, and I can share it with others. For myself, if I just come in and say File, New Desktop, and I want to start from scratch, we've got Home, we've got About, we've got Menu, we've got Blog for Katie's. Really quickly, coming on into my master page now, I can come to the wireframe set and say, yep, you know what? I know I need a footer for the menu. Press and drag it on the canvas. Notice how different that looks from the default footer. It's got all the styling associated. I can come on in and bring over my graphic element. As I mentioned, I would change this to SVG so that I could resize it here. But for now, I can just come on in, drag each of these elements in, drop them into position, and very quickly I've got interactive elements that could be for an entirely different design if I chose it. All right, that is one long-winded explanation without stopping and checking in on chat. So as a whole, and to reiterate, I'm looking for examples, and I'm going to show you a real-world example next. But any questions on what we've done so far that I should swing back and show? Looks like everybody's good. Dana jumped on board, which is fantastic. It's great to have her. Dana is also in the quality engineering team. So to have the 3 of us is really swell. And there's a couple Muse Masters also in there. Looks like you guys really don't need me, so I'm going to go finish my breakfast. Just kidding. Article link doesn't work. I will take a look at that in a second to see which article. Yeah, this is what happens when you have a session that is kind of really old. So I will look this up. The link to wireframing widgets just return the general widgets page. All right, let's take a quick look at that here. Here's the good news. Yeah. Just check. I have been remiss. So beginning of the year, actually towards the end of last year, we started using a space to show all of the widgets that are out there. It's at musewidgets.com. and it allows you to see what's in the community for sale and for free. I need to add the Katie's Cafe widget elements here. I haven't brought over some of the Adobe stuff. I kind of forgot. But in the meantime, there's probably another place we can find it. Let's just look. So if I go to muse.adobe.com and go into the tutorials area, perhaps, and swing on down here, I think there's still an article on wireframing websites. And in this article, I'm going to grab this. There is the ability to download the beta. Not that this is old article, but there should also be some links to the assets. I don't know. I think I'm remiss. I'll make you a deal. Give me a couple hours, and I will be sure. I'm going to get this article because I want to make sure you guys have access to it. And I do think there's a link in there to get to the wireframing widgets. But bear with me. I will go to the Muse widget directory, which is accessible here at Adobe Muse, so muse.adobe.com. Click on widgets. I will add the wireframes in here so that it's there, because I forgot to put it up there when we switched spaces to that. So I owe you some bits. If you guys want to hang out a little bit, I can also get you a Dropbox link if you're desperate. But best bet would be to let me go ahead and put it into the directory. Let's do that, because then it's available for everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look. We only have a little bit longer, but I want to take a look at a real-world example. So many of you that come to our sessions through the years have known me to talk about Aaron Lawrence. And he is a Muse designer, an early adopter back in the day. He did some really wonderful work with scroll effects, and we have some articles coming out on CC Learn pretty soon that really include some of his artwork, really great stuff. But he kindly, because he's a really nice guy, she said suggestively, he kindly gave me a link to a wireframe that he had built out for a client that actually shipped his product. And so let's take a look at that. So this is a real-world scenario. Aaron Lawrence works for a company called Pivotal Labs, and Pivotal Labs does really, really cool stuff. They've got about 200 developers and 150 designers, and they're growing in leaps and bounds. But for example, Uber will come and talk to them for about 6 months to a year about building the Uber iPhone app, for example. And they do extensive whiteboard workflow testing, usability testing, because they'll have complex workflows. This example is a real-world scenario that is now gone live. So if I preview this site in the browser, we can look at the finished instance pretty quickly here as well. So you notice this is for NookPress. I'm going to go ahead and click up a second page. So everything we're going to look at we can see in the finished website design. So just beside it, this is the actual shipping NookPress website. But you'll notice what Aaron's done here. He was doing usability testing, and he wanted to clearly understand if users knew how to build out their custom book here. So he studied that particular workflow in a very, very basic wireframe way. So you'll notice he has just one highlight color. I can go on in and build a book, and there's two choices here. They can see black and white or full color. Depending on where I click, you'll notice there's some level of guidance here too. You can select black and white, but full color is going to be more the flow that he's expecting here. So when I click along here, it'll activate my links here, I believe, unless I do this wrong. Paper color. I can come in and log into the site. Let's just see, I might have gone a little too fast there and skipped a step. Let's try this. Hello. I want to start over. Do over. It also helps to look at the layout here. He's not even bothering with a master page. He also doesn't bother with paragraph or graphic styles, even though I've told him, which is why you guys have to send me your real wireframes, because it may be that we're talking about something that you guys don't use in your workflow. I'd like to know it. But as I take a look at the design here, he's got just basically decision trees. So he's going to present you with the print, choosing the print color, and then he's got the active state for that. So you'll notice that each one, as I come along here, I can find that active state. Let's come in one more time and say preview the site in the browser. See if I did something wrong here. So I'm building out the book. I'll choose my cover format and then the color that I want to work with as I go along here and progress along. So paper color, then I can come in and select trim size. So it's stepping you through each of these processes. And showing options like, is this the appropriate time to ask about how many pages they might want? And as I mentioned, when you click on out, it takes you to the very live instance, which is very, very close to what was done here. Now, in Aaron's example, they use coders because the projects that they work on, a team of coders will spend 6 months to build out something for Barnes & Noble, for example. So they've got the bucks to actually hand code out the work for many different devices and such. The thing that's important for them, though, is Aaron can build out that entire experience. He can do everything here without talking to the developers. He gets to iterate with the client, do lots of usability validation, change it many times over, really, really know that the client is happy and the people that are using the website have a good experience before he hands it to the development team. So he doesn't have to have a full-time coder, 2 or 3, sitting with him as he does that whole process. So it really, as their large organization, really saves a huge amount of just money to not have to have a developer as they're making up their mind about what they want. All right, we are down to the ripe old last 9 minutes. Notice what I have right here. I have a link to submitting your wireframe/finish site, and I have a picture of the oh-so-famous Muse Rockstar mug. Thanks to Ali Pordelli. This is what he sent us when it arrived to his house a few years ago. So what I would suggest is if you have some good wireframes examples, go ahead and click this wireframe finished site. It's the site of the day submission form. Click it, put something in the comments letting me know it's a wireframe example. Send me a link to the finished site and then send me your source Muse file. And if it's for real and it's for substance, I will send you a mug. I know, everybody would love a mug. I am a hoarder. We only had a few bit of mugs, and I've been giving them away very slowly. But I have to get over it and just open up the floodgates. I'm glad you have your mug, Ali. Are you bragging in front of all our people here? So that's what I got for now. You'll notice on the lower right-hand corner, there is the Future Jam Session Topics pod, where I need you to tell me what you want to talk about next. We've done 146 recordings. The 146th, I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to come back with that link. But please do let me know what else you want to talk about. If you're making a site for yourself, so no client, would you still make a wireframe? Depends on how you think. I think that the biggest travesty that a designer is faced with as a desktop publisher is having at their fingertips these really mature tools. I'm actually going to shut up, though, because I told you I just make it up. Folks like Ali Pordelli, Brad Lowrick, they actually build out many, many sites for real clients. So ask them, do you wireframe before you build out a site, Mr. Pordelli? I'm going to put you on the spot. Other folks that have done a number of websites, what's the answer? I think some folks will just do it on paper. They'll do it on a whiteboard. The wireframe is definitely a communication tool, and it's definitely a way for a stranger. You never get a second chance at a first impression. So for a stranger to stop and try to decipher what you're trying to achieve in the website, wireframes are amazing for that. So it is a good question. So Ali does, but he starts it in Muse. Russell wants to know if there's a MooCow presentation. There has not been. Go ahead and tell me what you want to learn more about. So I do regularly, I think that 99% of the Muse community wants to use MooCows, which are configurable Muse widgets that you can get from that Muse directory that I showed you, or go to musewidgets.com. 1% of the world, I think, wants to make widgets. There is a GitHub space. There are folks like Ali on this session that build out widgets all the time. We could do a how do you build out widget thing. I couldn't do it because I don't do it. But we could invite folks. I'm just not clear how many people would want to attend. Yeah, as Brad mentioned, 123muse.com, which is an online education magazine, has a whole article on widgets as a whole. I don't know how much he gets into creating a moo cow, but he talks about using moo cows for sure. All right, I'm going to stop the recording because we have to stop. And Scroll Effects 101, I'm always up for that. How about a look at all shop widgets available in their relevant applications? Yeah, we can never talk about widgets too much if you ask me, because they're such an extension to the functionality of the app. With the widget directory up and running, I think it's so amazing to be able to find the widget you want by doing a search there. And there's been a thought about inviting widget developers to come show their best widgets off. So let me know if that is an idea that has legs by commenting in the chat. I'm going to go grab the recording. I'll be right back.